episode 23, and as much as I am excited to be at this episode, real talk, I miss Jen. And I'm alone again this week, only for a couple more weeks before she joins me again. And I'm just going to be honest, listening to my own voice is just weird and harder. So Jen, if you get a chance to listen to this, know that you are missed. I'm so excited for when you come back. So this week, we're breaking out of our normal routine. Every week, we've had the chance to introduce you to a different woman, one of our girls running their race in their place. And I've gotten the opportunity to share with you some of my own story of growing up, a pastor's kid, and my life since then. But today, I get to introduce you to somebody who walked a whole lot of my journey with me and has such a powerful story and testimony of his own that I wanted a chance for you to hear it. And so I have invited my brother Nathanael onto the podcast as a special Hey Girl guest. I guess it'd be the Hey Guy just for a day. And he's going to share his story. And girls, I want to encourage you as you listen to this, I don't know, just to remember, it was a reminder for me that my brother and I grew up in the same house, went to the same schools, same parents, same siblings, all of it. And God still just led us in very, very different paths. And I was reminded in hearing this story, talking to my brother, just that of God's faithfulness in whatever part of the journey he's called us and whatever road that we walk or race that we run. And so ladies, wherever you are today, I pray that this is a reminder and encouragement to you that wherever you're running, wherever your race is taking you, that God is faithful to go with you. And I hope you are as encouraged as I was as you listen to my brother's story today. Let me introduce you to my brother, Nathanael Blevins.
Nathanael, I know you've been dying to say these words. So welcome to the podcast. Do you want to say hey to the listeners?
Hey, girl.
Oh, you did that so well. It's like you've practiced. For our listeners who don't know this, I have 4 brothers, but you are the brother that is closest to me in age. I'm the baby of the family, but you are only 13 months older than me. Mm-hmm. And so in all of our life, we have basically been forced together in everything.
It's rough.
It's been rough. You know, I remember you went to kindergarten and I was like, you ain't doing that without me. And I jumped in kindergarten and basically ruined your life and followed you through school. I have told you this before and I will tell you again on microphone. I think that you have an incredible story that is absolutely worth telling. And I'm going to have sappy moment to say, as your sister, I am actually pretty honored and privileged that you were willing to come and sit down in front of an awkward microphone with me and let me ask you questions and you answer them honestly. I may have set you up there.
Now, wait, what about all that money you promised me?
Oh, yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Oh, man.
So for those who don't know you, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you came from, a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I was born in Maine, like someone else I know.
Yeah.
My dad was a pastor, like someone else I know.
That's going to get really old if you say that for every single thing. All right, so we grew up pastors' kids. A lot of people have ideas of what that looks like, and I've shared some stories, but I'm curious from you, what are some of your experiences growing up a pastor's kid?
Most of it, I would say, is you get a sense that you're being observed a little more closely. You don't necessarily feel the freedom to do some things that maybe some other kids are doing. And there's a sort of expectation, I guess, that comes along with that. I know that probably sounds pretty stereotypical to say, but that's one of the big things.
And if you were to answer honestly, what kind of pastor's kid, when you put yourself on the scale of pastor's kids, what people think they are, which we all know what people think they are, but what kind of pastor's kid, how do you feel like you personally did in that, with all of that, what you just described, the pressure, people watching you?
Oh, I was the best. I was a perfect angel.
Yeah.
You were there. I mean, come on.
That's why I'm saying, yeah.
No, I think when I was a little kid, I didn't really register a lot, but like so many when I hit high school, then I decided I didn't want to be under a microscope anymore. I didn't want to care anymore. I didn't want to have that pressure anymore. So I decided to go the complete opposite direction and not just do what I wanted to do, but also do what I knew I was not supposed to do, just for the sake of breaking free from that sense of expectation that had been there all those years.
Talk me through that a little bit, because obviously I was there, but for you, what did that look like in your high school years, the breaking free, the I'm going to forge my own path here?
The thing I remember the clearest, I guess, was that we lived a couple doors down from a kid that I was real good friends with. Their family went through some rough times, and our family went through some rough times, and in the midst of all that, we moved out of town, sort of to get away. And I remember that sort of being a thing where I was kind of resentful about that. And during that period is when I started doing stuff like sneaking out of the house at night to go meet up with my friend whose family was also going through a hard time. So he was sort of feeding that a little bit. We're feeding each other is maybe a more accurate way to put it. So we would call during the day when everything was, whatever above board, and arrange for him to sneak out and steal his mom's van and drive 20 minutes back to where we were and pick me up, and then drive around all night and get into all kinds of trouble and mischief and breaking into places. And I don't know how deep and dark you want me to go, but it was it was a wild time.
I went all the deep, all the dark. No, not really. So I'm going to fill in a little bit here because I do remember those days, but I know for me, it would have been our junior year, somewhere around there. Dad dropped a bomb, probably as much of a bomb on me as it was on you, that we were relocating completely, because it was, you obviously described a big deal to move just out of the town. But now he's like, hey, by the way, we're leaving the country. And so some big things happened in those next months or years. We don't have to go great into detail, but I mean, I don't want to spoil the story, but you are my first official bank robber on the Hey Girl podcast, so I feel like we can't totally skip over it.
It's an honor.
It's an honor and a privilege. So that first while in Maine, just give me a glimpse into that, because it all kind of happened really quickly, at least from my memory.
Yeah, not long before we had left Canada, I had, just by circumstance, at a yard sale, picked up a book about train robbery. And I read that book more than once, as I recall. And then after we moved and we were in the middle of nowhere, I had even less to occupy my mind, so I sort of doubled down on that. So I kept reading that book. I acquired a couple other books that weren't about train robbery, they were now about bank robbery. And during that time was when my interest in computers began, but it began because I found a little book online about computer hacking. So there was a lot of theme there about becoming a lawbreaker and sort of escalating from breaking my parents' rules to breaking, the state's rules or the government's rules, whatever you want to say. And as enough time passed with me continually immersing myself in that, I sort of lost touch with reality in a way, in that I began to be increasingly convinced that I could do this. Like, I was going to do this full time. This was going to be my ticket out of here. So I started doing what all kids do, and you get blank paper and you draft plans and you start scheming and all this. And
I just want to calm the hearts of all mothers out there when he says all kids do this.
When they're planning something and scheming. Not all kids rob banks.
Not all of your kids are drawing bank robberies when they're curled up in the corner.
Yeah. So that sort of snowballed over. So I'm sure it felt fast to everyone else. I'm sure it came out of the blue, or more out of the blue to everyone else. But for me, it was 8 to 12 months of just thinking about it nonstop. And then, one morning, and it was directly tied into all my teen angst and emotions. So when I would get the most upset, I would be the most resolved that I was going to do it. And then one day, I decided that was that. So I forget how I got into town the first time. I might have driven myself, and I made my first attempt, which was from a payphone, and called in, made bomb threats, and tried to get them to bring the money out, and the whole thing blew up in my face. Because
I see what you did there. Sorry, too soon. My bad.
And that would have been a mercy if I would have clued in at that point that maybe I wasn't supposed to be doing this. But because I was at a payphone and I wasn't there, I didn't get caught that time around. So I went back and stewed for a couple weeks at home, and then one morning I emptied out my backpack before school and filled it up with all of my paraphernalia, different clothes and stuff like that, and then got dropped off at school. But I didn't go into school that day. I waited for my dad to drive away, and then I just skipped school, walked into town, and again there was divine intervention, or whatever you want to say, waiting for me.
Yep.
First bank that I walked into, walked up to the teller, and the lady went to our church.
I remember this.
Like, how glaring do you need the signs to be? But when you're a 16, 17-year-old, you're not really too aware of that. So I very awkwardly exchanged some currency and then walked out, and then regained myself, took a cab to a nearby town, and then went into a bank and shaking like a leaf the entire time, passed a note and did it, and then took off and got on a bus and came down to the great city of Boston.
Oh, wow. I think I forgot you flew out of Boston.
Yeah. So I took a bus from Maine down to Boston. I stayed a night in a hotel and probably had a real weird hotel clerk checking me in, paying all cash and whatnot. And I think that was 24 hours of a weird kind of shock. I just wasn't in my own skin at that point and couldn't calm myself down. And then it seems crazy looking back, but that was the first time I had ever flown. I went to the airport, the same airport that I just flew in here to come see you.
Did you have a lot of fond memories?
Yeah, some flashbacks. And I don't know if I'm going into too much detail, but I flew up to Canada, and I had a friend up there. And this again ties into earlier where this was all rooted in being so upset of being uprooted from Canada, where all my friends were, taken down to Maine and all that. So in the midst of all this, I had been in touch with a friend up there and talked a big game to him about how I was going to do this full time, and hey, you need to come on the road with me. And like any high school kid, he's like, yeah, sure, not thinking anything of it. But then of course I got up there and I called him, and he came and met me, and I remember him being white as a sheet and just thinking like, this is when I backpedal. This is when I get out of this. Like, good luck with that. I'm not going to be joining you. And thankfully, back at home in Maine, I had a swell detective of a sister and a couple brothers who were very determined to find me. And I think it was you that it occurred to before anybody else, he's going back to Canada. He's going back to find his friends. So even then, you had an insight into where I was really at.
I was cracking the code.
Yeah.
I feel like this might be actually the best time for me to confess how much I was a part of your being found and then later arrested.
Rat.
Now that you don't have people on the inside for me. So yeah, all that went down. We had some crazy times back in those high school. We ended up getting you back across the border. You served your time. You were a good boy. We're all so proud of you. And then you get out early. I know I'm fast forwarding a little, but both of us head off to Bible school. Tell me a little bit about that transition. I know you want to say from one lockup to the other, so I'm just going to say it for you. But
the frying pan into the fire.
But that's a pretty big shift from being in a, prison to full-time Bible school.
I think that the experience of being inside made me sensitive enough to my own shortcomings that I felt that I wanted and needed structure and direction. And when you're in a place like that and everything's been pulled out from under you, of course you cry out to God, and of course you are more than willing to reconsider prayer and getting back to your, faith. And so Bible school felt like the next step, but also kind of a way of committing to doing better. You were there too, but you were coming from a different place, obviously, and but just mentally and energy-wise and all that. And for me, it was just readjusting. It was readjusting to being outside, but it was readjusting to the faith. It was being thrust into an environment that was very theologically heavy. I mean, when you go to seminary, that kind of happens. But so it was a lot at once. I mean, I look back now and I think I was an emotional wreck, and it's amazing I got through, kind of thing. But at the same time, it probably was good that I was there, because there were not a lot of ways to get off track that were available, which was kind of why I went there in the first place. So
when your curfew's 4 p.m., it's kind of hard to get in much trouble.
Yeah. So there's no alcohol on campus. There's no partying. There's, what I mean? So, yeah, that was that phase of life. So I continued on. You met some Andy guy and decided that he was better than the Lord and learning about the Bible, so you just took off. Left me there alone.
Never said better than the Lord.
But yeah, I went there for 3 years, and like I said, I was sort of emotionally all over the place, trying to figure things out. I wasn't always sure. It was a very conservative school. The theology was conservative. All of the staff was very conservative. And I still had a lot of my wildness. So I struggled with that a lot. And I actually met my wife there. She was in my class all 3 years, and we started dating in the second year. Good things came out of it, for sure, obviously. Just in case she's listening to this.
For nothing else, you got an amazing wife.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Thank you, Bible school.
But I, in high school and in my childhood, in a way I probably didn't understand, I had kind of a not so great experience with religion, with faith, with church. Even though I participated, I prayed the sinner's prayer when I was very young. I was baptized in junior high or high school. So I sort of went through all that, and then I had this rebellion period, and then I went to Bible school, and I began to experience again what I feel like is sort of a negative, unfortunately I feel like unhealthy expression of the faith. And then if you fast forward into our third year, by the end of the third year, things are getting pretty serious with Lisa and I. And that summer, I went and was a program director at a camp. And I decided that summer, I sort of committed after going through a lot of things. I was going to be doing the fourth year. She was going to do the fourth year. And for those who don't know, at that school, the way that they did the fourth year was, instead of being there on campus the entire year, they would actually farm you out to a local church or some kind of faith-based organization. Yeah. Free labor. And,
unpaid internship. Yeah. You're paying to do the internship. Exactly.
Yeah. So she knew where she wanted to go. She was going to go serve at a girls' home in New Hampshire. And I knew where I was going to go, out east, to work at this church. We had it all planned out. And then I decided that I was going to ask her to marry me. So I basically got the ring. And then I think it was at the end of the summer, went up there for a week. So she lived in Canada. And I asked her dad's permission, which was an interesting conversation. He's a pretty low-key guy, so I felt like the aggressive one there, and I don't think that's how that's supposed to play out. Anyway, I asked her, and she said yes. And it was good. But then we went back to the school for our fourth year to start. And you do about 2 or 3 weeks, as I recall. I got a fuzzy memory that way. on campus before you head out to your placements. And of course it was big news when we got back on campus and she had this ring on her finger. But the school was so conservative and so sort of stuck in the past, I feel like. They actually had a rule on the books that 2 students could not get engaged without first seeking the approval of the school, the actual board there, which sounds crazy in retrospect, but that was what we were living in. And I had not done that. So...
Because you were wearing flip-flops and wearing your hair.
I was a total rebel. And so I didn't know how they were going to take it. But during the summer while working at this camp, one of the staff members of the school had passed through the camp, and I had asked him his opinion on it. How do you think this would go? Because I don't have an opportunity to ask. I'm going before school starts, and that's when it's going down. And
it's all like Donkey Kong.
Yeah. And his opinion to me, and I'm not faulting him for this or trying to hold him to it, but was, well, given the circumstances and the timing and all that sort of thing, I'm sure it'll be fine. Just make sure that you are forthright when you get there and you just go and talk to somebody. And I said, sure, I'll do that. And that's what we did. But it didn't go so well. So we went and sat down and talked with him, and we got a very like and ha sort of thing from the president that we still had violated the rules, so he was going to have to sit down with the other board members and discuss what to do. So they made us sit tight, and then they came back with this crazy decision that because we had violated the rules, our choices were to leave immediately. Don't say goodbye to our friends. Don't drag our feet. They didn't want us to sort of cause a stink on our way out by having all these negative conversations. And we were basically being forced to drop out. Or hand over the ring, the physical ring, to them until such time as they had time to deliberate over whether or not we should get married. And then they would get back to us with their decision, which again is mind-blowing looking back. But when you're a kid, you know, even at that age, you're still a kid, really. You don't know enough of the world to be able to be like, this is crazy. I'm getting out of here. And I knew at that time, I mean, that was a really hard spot to be in, deciding whether to drop out right then or give them the ring. And my rebellious side was immediately awakened. And I was like, there's no way. But I loved Lisa then as I do now. And I knew that her heart was set on going to this home in New Hampshire. And that was most of what was upsetting her in that moment. The thought of not being able to go and do that just because of this. And so I had a hard decision to agree. We had a hard decision to give them the ring. And that's what we did. And that staff member, who was really amazing, the same guy that was at the camp, went out of his way to... He specifically asked to be the one that would keep the ring during that time period. He was very consoling to us because I think that he really knew that it was wrong, but he was bound by his obligations. He secretly whispered to us that he would keep it in his office and we could come and look at it and put it on whenever we wanted. Which was pretty awesome.
That's awesome.
So it was a little bit of a light in the darkness. And so what ended up happening was... they deliberated and decided it was okay for us to get married and gave the ring back. So that meant we were allowed to proceed with our 4th years. But by that time, that just was kind of like the last straw for me. I mean, there were many little things over the 3 years that just were continually wearing me down about that place. And that was kind of it. So what I did was, now that we were both allowed to go do the 4th year, I decided independently that I was done. I was going to leave. I felt very uneasy about staying.
Yeah.
So, not to belabor it, but basically I was supposed to go out east. There was another student named Shauna Stevens.
Oh.
Yeah.
One of our girls.
I've heard that.
Yeah, you should go listen to her episode if you haven't. It's real good.
She was also going out east, and I was supposed to give her a ride. So I was coerced both by the pastor whose church I was supposed to be going to for that 4th year and by her for the sake of the ride to go out and just see the area that I was going to. And I did that, gave her a ride out there, and still just didn't want to do it. So at that point, I dropped out, and that was it. So to this day, I don't have a 4-year degree from anywhere or anything like that. All because of the ring.
I feel like there should be an aww.
Rough. So that's how that all kind of played out.
So that's huge, especially coming from, I mean, everything that we built up the story to be from, you know, you grew up a pastor's kid, you had all these experiences, you kind of had this rebellion time, ended up serving time in prison, but then you got released, went back to Bible school, then had another kind of bad experience in some ways, just some stuff stirred some rebellion also, maybe, I think looking back on it, realizing in a lot of ways you were kind of getting your feet under you for the first time. And so walk me ahead, because this is not the end of this spiritual journey for you in any way, shape, or form. You did end up marrying Lisa, which I am incredibly grateful, because she is an amazing wife to you. And as a sister, she is the wife that you pray for your brothers, and given you 2 of the most adorable little boys on the face of the planet. Sorry, anyone else who has sons, but you'd have to meet them, you would agree. But let's talk through a little bit of this, the years that followed this for you, and this, the spiritual side of this journey, coming from that, and some other, I guess, life-altering things that were coming around the bend that maybe you didn't necessarily see coming either, but definitely impacting your faith.
Yeah, everything that went down at the beginning of that 4th year was a pretty significant spiritual wound, for lack of a better term. And that just turned into kind of a sort of dark period where I had everything planned. I sort of knew where everything was going. I had done a lot of speaking when I was at school. My dad was a pastor. Everybody was sure that's the direction I was going, including Lisa. Bait and switch. Surprise!
Oh, ouch.
So I went into a very utilitarian secular phase where I just started looking for work. I thought, I'm still getting married soon. I need to go out and get a job and do all those things you do.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I tried going back home to Maine and making that work, but there wasn't a lot of work there, so I ended up in Connecticut. And that went into a year of working in Connecticut, talking to Lisa on the phone up in New Hampshire, driving up every weekend to see her, but not having much of an interest at all in going to church or pursuing that. I sort of shut that part of my life down. I still went from time to time because I was living with my brother in Connecticut, and he went regularly. But there was nothing there. And there was probably a lot of anger there, and it took me a long time to get past the worst of that experience. And I would still argue that I'm probably not still 100% past. I don't know what I would feel like if I ever drove back to the school and, walked that campus again. But the worst of that period was then. And then Lisa got done her 4th year. I did go back for her graduation, and that was not super easy, as you can imagine, but I wanted to be there for her. And then when that was over, we headed into a summer when we were gearing up for the wedding and all that. We got married. Yeah. That was a little bit of an interesting experience as well, because she was from Canada and I was from the States, and the way that it works when you are marrying a foreigner from another land
Yes.
is that the government wants to make sure that they vetted them properly and all that. So we went through a fiancé visa process that took a while. And so we ended up having a big wedding in Canada.
Yeah.
And then we had to drive across the border and have another little wedding. And by then, I had started going to church a little bit more, but again, still no commitment to it, and did not want really to talk about it or get involved in it at any level. But we had our second wedding, as we call it, in the pastor's office at the church that I was going to. And that proved to be good. It actually proved to be amazing. You might even say providential or whatever you want to say, because there was a woman who worked at the church, Kirsten Gillette.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And what they did was, when we were in the senior pastor's office to get married, we were there under the auspices of, this is going to be a quiet little quick thing and we'll get our certificate and get out of here. Well, he pressed the intercom and said, hey, we're having a wedding in the senior pastor's office. Why can't everybody come in here? And so all these people come flooding in, and one of those people was Kirsten Gillette. And she introduced herself to us and said, hey, you should meet my husband, Bryn, and we have a small group in the town that we lived in, that we had our first apartment in. And that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship and a lifelong friendship between Bryn, her husband, and I, and Kirsten and Lisa. And that was instrumental in beginning to heal those wounds. I feel like, even though this is supposed to be an interview about me, I could probably go on about Bryn forever. But
he's pretty awesome. I'm gonna shout out for that guy.
It would have been very difficult for me at that time to go into a small group or any kind of Bible study where I felt like it was traditional, or the people there were just all about the Bible verses and everybody had, any of that. But going into their home that first time, there was just a sense of love and welcome and no expectations, no pressure. And that was so refreshing and foreign after all the experiences I had had. And likewise, those two as a couple are very much that way. They're so down to earth. They're so loving and open to everybody, transparent. And after experiencing so many years of what I could describe as just sort of masks and people putting up fronts and people saying what they knew they were supposed to say and not being transparent, that was much needed. So we stayed in that small group for years, and I had a lot of long conversations with him where I felt like I could finally open up about all the things that had happened and all those hard things. And he, to this day, has been one of the people that have kept me in a place where I felt like there's something to the faith that is genuine and is real. And when I was in my darkest moments, he was never there to pull me back in or to get me going to church again or to get me more involved or any of that. He was just there, and that was it. And I feel like I learned so much from him, just from what I experienced, from the way that he ministered to me in my life. And I learned so much about what it means to just be present with someone who's in a dark place and how much that means.
Wow.
So those years were pretty significant that way. And I would say that the wounds were definitely still not healed, though. There was a period of time in there where I thought, okay, maybe I need to do more. So we thought, we'll start getting involved at the church. And it's not very long when you get involved at a church if one person finds out that you went to seminary. It's like, woohoo, these people aren't just off the street, they're classically trained.
That's amazing. They're classically trained.
Like, half the work's already been done. Let's get them in there. So we sort of, I'm not saying we were rushed, but like we got involved at a pretty rapid rate. And yes. I immediately started to feel this seizing up in my chest. The opposite of what you would expect. I didn't feel like, oh, everything's going in the right direction. This is what God wants for me. And I'm feeling the voice of the Spirit. It was, this is wrong. I shouldn't be here. I need to get out of here. I need to bow out. I need to disappoint some people. And so...
Way to quote my therapist. Back at me there, pal.
So I did. We quit midstream and being involved. I probably did disappoint a lot of people, but it just proved to be too hard for me. And that would actually happen twice during our years there at that church. And I never got into a place while we were there where I felt like I could do that. There was still probably a lot of issues that were holding me back from that. So
yeah, you weren't there forever though, because you guys picked up, transitioned off to Florida, and then it just got so much better.
Yeah, so we were in Connecticut for a number of years. During those years, we bought our first house. Huge mistake. And had our first kid. Huge. No, that wasn't a mistake.
I was like, whoa.
We were trying to make do in a very expensive state. It was not going so well. We were young and naive. We bought too much house at the wrong time. Around late 2007, right before everything crashed. It was awesome timing. And it was also around that time that I got a phone call out of the blue from my dad, who had been a pastor for decades and decades. And that was a permanent association of him and that world, and that was my childhood, and all of my memories and everything were anchored around that, for good or for ill, the good ones and the bad ones. And he basically just sort of shattered all that with one phone call and confessed some things that had been going on for many of those years that I had no idea about. And the consequence of all of that coming out in that phone call was that his ministry came to an end in spectacular fashion, and we all came together as a family and were sort of there to support, but we were also there for that event.
Yeah.
And that rocked me as well. I think when I first got the phone call, I was in a kind of a shock, and so I was very dutiful and optimistic, and I'm here for you, I'll do whatever you want. But then as time went on, that just really was another chip in the foundation. So around that time as well, I have a very clear memory that I did not associate at that time with that phone call, and I can't be sure that it's totally related, but I was walking through a bookstore.
Yeah.
And I saw a book there on one of the tables by a very prominent atheist. And it was so strange, but up until that moment, I would never have considered even cracking the cover. My entire existence up to that point had been, they are false prophets, they are leading people astray, they are straight up evil, however you want to phrase it. Right. But I did. I picked up the book and I opened it, and for the first time in my entire life, I considered the idea that maybe there wasn't a God. And that led me down a path of starting to read all of those books. So I read a lot of Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and all those books that were out at that time. And then I made a connection with a guy who had left the church and who had done a whole bunch of study and decided that he didn't believe anymore either. And so we sort of fed off one another. And then at that point, I decided to leave the faith, also in spectacular fashion. And I decided, I'm not really sure why, but I wanted to do it very publicly. I wanted to be very open about it, so that I could be sure that I wasn't gonna fake it. I wasn't gonna present a false face to people. So in that very short period of time, my memories and my whole image of what my childhood had been was completely destroyed. Any faith or belief that I had had up until that point was completely destroyed. I just totally walked away from it, and tore down the entire wall. And then we got into some rough financial straits because, again, we made a foolish choice on a house. And then a transfer was offered to me to Florida for my job. So I had kind of fallen into working in IT, and there was an opportunity there. So we took it. We packed up, and Lisa and I and our oldest son, Tristan, who was just about 1 year old at that time, moved down to Florida. And nothing really changed for me spiritually when we went down there. If anything, I was more isolated now. It was easier for me to tell Lisa, who all this time, you got to remember, she was not going through the things the way I was, or the things I was. Wanted to go to church, wanted to continue to go to church, but when we got to Florida, something about that, I kind of, like a butthole, put my foot down and said, I'm not going anymore. I'm done. I'm not going to go. If you want to go, you go on your own, but I'm not going. And we were in Florida for, man, I think around 5 years. It was a good chunk of time. And that, even though we were in the Sunshine State and the beaches were close and Disney was close, and everybody knows God lives at Disney World, His blessing is on that place, especially now that they have a Starbucks.
Amen and amen.
Yeah. Despite all those trappings being there, all of that sort of external detail, that is probably the darkest phase of all of this. And it's kind of crazy because it didn't end all that long ago, but I'm always going to look back on that because our family has a little bit of a history with depression and that sort of vein of mental illness. And I had, I'm sure, been suffering from it up until that point, but I had never addressed it. I'd never gone to talk to anyone. I'd certainly never taken any medication. I was determined not to because of many of our experiences, watching our mother and specifically with medications. But there was a point a couple of years into Florida, and I guess this is the part where people get emotional on this podcast.
It happens. I'm sorry.
Where things got so dark that I remember getting in my car and I was just going to drive away. And I wasn't coming back. But I stopped a few miles outside of town and just kind of bawled my eyes out. And I just felt so much despair, I guess, because even though other details in my life were great, we had fallen into a huge house that we didn't have to pay any money to rent. I had 2 cars. I had a beautiful wife. I think at that time our second kid had come along. I had a job that was good by all accounts. I was in such a dark place that I could not enjoy any of it. And everything was anxiety, stress, depression. I was trying to just find whatever I could to distract myself. And something about that dark moment in the car broke me down, and I realized I need help. I've resisted medication all these years.
Yeah.
This is enough. I need to do something. So I finally went and saw someone, and they prescribed me some meds. I got on those meds, and I think it was within a week. Suddenly I thought, everything was amazing.
Everything is awesome.
So they worked, and I'm sure that's probably standard fare for that sort of thing, that you sort of peak up initially because it's a whole new chemical ball game going on in your body. But that stabilized me. But that was just an emotional thing. I was still very much did not want to be involved at the church. On occasion, Lisa could really convince me to go, but I still wanted nothing to do with it. I was very outspoken. Anybody who was connected with me on Facebook during that time, I apologize. It was pretty rough. But I would start arguments with anybody I could, any believer I could, about that subject matter. I had all the answers. And I guess it's important to note that during this time, even at that distance, Bryn was still a core part of my life and my journey. They came down to visit us at different points there, and he was one of the only ones that really stayed with me in a true way. Not I'm here to fix you, but he was very forthcoming at different points of, you're not going to get rid of me. You know, he would say, I'm not worried about you at all. Because I would unload to him, to backtrack just a little bit. When I first made this decision to walk away, and I was very public about it, I got more than one phone call from guys that I had gone to seminary with, and both of them were in tears, pleading with me, reasoning, threatening, whatever they thought they could do to get me to figure out what they thought I needed to figure out. And that just increase my resolve to walk away and to feel like they were off track. But Bryn was never that way. And he would always talk to me like, this is just another step on your journey. And that was so beautiful to me. And I probably never said it to him. I probably never said it to anybody. But that sort of kept me in an open place. I never totally could close the door because of that. So I was always in a place of, I have read all these things that I cannot unread. I think these things that I can't unthink. I see this all differently now. But if you are out there, I don't want to be so hard-headed and so foolish that I miss it. But I was also very raw whenever I would have those little moments of communication about, look at the garbage people you put in my life to represent you. Look at the stuff that I went through. Look at the version of what you're supposed to represent. It's reasonable for me to have tossed all this. But still just always left it open a crack just in case, because I wanted something real all that time. That's really what I was looking for. So, things in Florida, despite the medication and all that, just progressively got worse and worse and worse. We had one of our other brothers in our life at that time.
There's way too much to our family history for just one episode.
It's a spider web that goes in many directions. Who was causing some significant stress and difficulty for us. This wonderful house that we were in that was costing us nothing was technically his house, and he would come down whenever he wanted, but he lived a vastly different lifestyle, and it was wild. And I had kids, and so that resulted in a lot of fights, but also just growing anxiety. And so that all came to a head, and he took a little trip to where I had been. So
to prison, that's it.
Yeah.
Just so we're clear.
I have to put too fine a point on it. And after that happened, we had to leave that house. All that sort of fell apart. And the pressure cooker really started to build at my work, because my performance and everything else during this entire period had just gone downhill progressively. And I was in a particular kind of job where I was logging my hours, and my performance during the day was measured in the number of hours I was doing support calls and things like that. So there was a very clear paper trail of, you used to do this many hours of billable, productive time in a week, and is going down and down and down and down. And so the pressure is building there, and I am just getting increasingly desperate and worked up. And I can't recall clearly, but I'm sure there were moments in there where I sort of cried out to the God I wasn't 100% sure was there. If you can do something, I need you to do it. And if you can show yourself, I'm happy to see you and to step into that, but I'm done. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I got a call out of the blue from a guy I'd made friends with in Florida a few years before, who lived in the great state of Texas, God's promised land, if you ask any of them. And it was a job offer, and it was everything that I needed, not to oversell it or make it sound like a job is going to fix your life, but it was going to get me out of that pressure situation I was in, where I had to perform every day. It was clear on paper, and people were all up in my grill about what's going on. And so that pressure was going to be off. It was going to be a little bit more money, so that pressure was off. And it just came at a time where everything had built to an untenable level. Like there was going to be an explosion soon, and my life was probably going to fall apart. So I feel like, because that door was still cracked, that to me was a little bit of light shining through that crack. And I thought, maybe this is him. Maybe he's trying to say something, and I want to try to listen. So we, a lot of things happened, but it all came together and it worked out. The timing was unbelievable, and we moved. They covered our moving expenses. Many details came into place to make that happen. And for some reason, when we got out to Texas, I felt more open to the idea of maybe trying to go back to church. And so for the first few weeks that we were there, we went to a couple churches. And up until that point, walking into a church, just going into a church was difficult for me. And I just felt an immediate uneasiness and just a sense of like, this isn't, this is not where I want to be. And these people are just like all the other ones before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And then one week we went into this little church called Milestone outside of Fort Worth. And it was in what used to be a grocery store on this little street, and this place had exploded in terms of their attendance and everything, to the point that they were just getting to a point when we showed up where they needed to move into a new space, and all that ball was rolling. But there was something about that church that was different than every other one I've walked into before that. And I immediately knew. I turned to Lisa and I said, this is the place. This is the church that we're going to be going to while we're here. And I really think that they have put such a strong emphasis on being genuine there, that it permeates everyone and everything. Because it's not just a let's be theologically correct, and oh, by the way, also we need to be genuine, or let's have good music, and also by the way, we need to be genuine. It was, we are going to be genuine first, and we're going to be real about where we're at. And something about that, it just, right from the moment you walk in the door. And so that sort of was another step in that direction. And then over the course of the next few months, there would be more and more services that I was sitting in where I was gritting my teeth and saying, you're not going to cry, you're not going to tear up, this is not getting to you, everything is good, we're holding our resolve, remember, we don't believe anymore, get the team together, what's going on here?
You were having like that Inside Out movie. You were having that kind of moment.
Exactly. Anger kept fighting for the controls. Yeah. And I remember, so we've been there now for a little over a year, and it was a few months ago that there was this particular Sunday, because again, a lot of things had changed and things were much better, but wherever you go, there you are. And I was still carrying all my baggage. And I was in a place, because of this move and the things that had happened, where the door was opened a little bit more. And I thought, I still don't believe all this stuff. I still don't subscribe to all of the theology that I was taught, but you sort of have my attention. I'm going to be open enough so that whenever that next thing happens, I'm aware. And a few months ago, the service, for whatever reason, there may or may not have been just some tiny waterworks, just a little bit, nothing unmanly or anything, but
you kept your man card and you felt your feelings.
Exactly. And now here I am on the Hey Girl podcast, so it's all been downhill.
Touche.
Yeah. But at the end of that service, a guy got up and he sang that song, Chainbreaker. And that just destroyed me. Like, it was full of waterworks. And then I was in the car driving home, trying to drive while tears are streaming down my face, and I got two little kids in the back, so I'm just sort of like leaning my head over against the side window, trying to act all casual, and Lisa's looking over like, are you okay? What's going on? And that, I feel like, was the beginning of this sort of cracking into this shield that I had built up. And it's just been a few things since then. So I'm not back where I was the first day that I walked into seminary. I don't want to present myself as being probably anywhere within the theological circles of most churches, where most people would be. But I am in a place where enough things have happened that I am more and more open. Somebody, I think it was Bryn actually, or one of the people up in the small group, at the time that I was going through everything, they made a comment to Lisa, because as you can imagine, this has been very difficult for her to watch me go through this, all of the emotional fallout of this. And somebody said to her, he's tearing his wall down, but he may be tearing it down so that he can rebuild it himself, brick by brick. And when that Sunday happened with that song and everything, she brought that up and reminded me that someone had said that. And so that is kind of where I'm at right now. I feel like I need to build the wall myself, brick by brick. And I don't talk a lot about where I'm at and what I'm thinking, because a lot of people want to get right into theological elements of it. Do you believe in predestination? Where are you at with the Bible? And it's
darn it, that was my next question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'll skip to the third one.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at. And yeah.
I think that side of it, what you just said, is a big part of why I know you looked at me funny when I said, hey, want to come on the Hey Girl podcast? But I just think, yes, you're my brother, and I will fully acknowledge that I am biased towards you in that way. And I feel like my heart stopped beating through most of you sharing the story, just because I feel like I'm walking this again with you. But a couple of things that I just wanted to speak into that. One, it's been an incredible thing to watch your journey. I know you just said the words, I'm not back where I was when I first entered seminary. And I just want to say, as your sister and as your friend, I feel like you're in such a healthier place than you were when you started seminary, because you are real and authentic about where you're at. And I'm just incredibly proud of who you are and where you are, and just your willingness to be honest about that. Because I think we get into these places where we learn to say the right things, or we say the thing we think we're supposed to say, or be the person we think we're supposed to be. And as much as this is part where I get emotional, it happens, just roll with it. You're walking away, that kind of, as you said, the public, I'm done with God, all of that was heart-wrenching for a sister to walk through. I just am so proud of the fact that in all of this journey that you've taken, you've never been afraid to ask the question that everybody's, you're going to ask the hard questions and you're going to go after the hard things. And that's brought you down some dark roads and some scary places, but ultimately where it's led you to even today. And I know your journey's not done, and I know there's a lot ahead. But I just think it's incredible. It's incredible to see the work that God's doing in your life. And I look at even listening to your story, and you probably slap me for turning it all into but I just see God's hand and his fingerprints all over it. Even when you were like, yeah, you don't exist. He's like, well, all right, well, I do, but just so many places along the way that I feel like and your wife is one of them. And I'm still pretty darn convinced or determined to get her I know she's scared to death to sit in front of a microphone, but I think hearing her story in this would be powerful for a lot of people. But, a question for you, and it's one that I get asked a lot, and I think I have asked myself a lot as the sister of someone walking through something like this. And you mentioned some of it, but for you, having walked this journey, talking to somebody who there's somebody in their life that they're kind of on a similar path. They've either walked away from their faith, they're really wrestling with it, they're in a dark place. What were some of the things that were helpful for you that people did or said? And then the flip side of that, were there things that just were not helpful at all that you're like, I know you meant well, but that actually wasn't helpful whatsoever?
Well, the helpful things, as I said before, most of that came from Bryn And I would say that the biggest part of that were, maybe you could divide it into two things. One is that throughout all of that, he was never ever even slightly apologetic about the fact that he wholeheartedly believed. He wasn't tailoring his language when he was around me or any of that. It was that, and that he was willing, as I said, just to be there and to be very forthright about the fact that our friendship wasn't dependent on how in the faith I was. It wasn't like I had these church friends and all that sort of thing, and I'm really close with them, but because you're in this place, I kind of got to keep you at arm's length so you don't get some of your dirtiness on me. It was never like that. And so those two things together, I think, were the heart of that, because it was a connection of this person who is this close and this open with me is also unapologetically this thing, and that is a huge part of their life. And that was sort of a bridge of mixing those two things together. Of a big reason why they are that way is because of where they're at in their life. So that from the helpful side, and I feel like that a lot of the unhelpful stuff was, again, sort of as you alluded to, people who wanted to be helpful or were trying to do what they felt was right. But whenever anyone would talk to me about what I believed, I wouldn't be able to give specifics about what they said, but I always got this sense, which I still get to this day sometimes actually, that they were sort of fishing for whether or not I was on their team still. They wanted me on their team. They wanted me back on their team. So when they're asking, what do you believe about this? And what do you think about this? The unspoken connotation there is, do you believe the same thing I do? And I want you to believe the same thing I do.
Yeah.
And at that point, you don't feel the freedom to just say, well, no, I don't believe that. That's ridiculous. Or I think this other weird thing over here that I once read in a Rob Bell book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so, yeah, I guess that's the best way I could answer that.
No, that's good, and it's helpful. I know that there are going to be listeners just hearing your story, most of them being half shocked that we just had a dude on the podcast. But in all honesty, I firmly believe that when people have the courage to be vulnerable, it empowers other people in their own honest vulnerability. And I have seen that. We've only been going since May, but the stories that have been sent to us about somebody shared about something, and for that person listening, like up until that moment just felt so alone in what they've been thinking and what they've been wrestling with, and then to hear someone else say like, no, me too. Like, I've been down this road, I've walked this journey. And my favorite personally is those stories that have not arrived, that it's just this sojourner of, I'm walking this too, like I'm here. And you know this, but we had our mom on, and I don't to this day don't think you've listened to hers, just because it can be hard to go back and...
I told you I don't like crying.
But it just, for people who even connected with that story, and you mentioned it briefly about the depression and anxiety and things that have gone through. And so you sharing your story, one, thank you for your courage and your willingness. And two, I just want to encourage you to keep telling your story and keep being honest about it and vulnerable, and not the honest part of what you think people want to hear or what they can handle. But I just think there were so many things today that as you're speaking, and I just was like, this powerful moment for me of, I can't wait for people to hear this and to be encouraged by it. And I'm really praying for those women and guys out there that'll hear this, that this is going to connect with them, and that for them they'll be like, okay, I'm not alone. And so thank you for being on today. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for letting me use my power of being your sister to basically manipulate you to come on to a podcast titled Hey Girl Podcast.
Welcome to episode 1 of the Hey Dude Podcast.
We officially changed. Awesome. But thank you.
Thank you.